Travel is an enriching experience for seniors, but it can come with its own unique challenges. So in this video, we're going to discuss some travel topics to help you travel more comfortably and more safely. Hi, it's Robin with SeniorSafetyAdvice.com. Tune into our channel for tips and hints for seniors and caregivers about aging in place safely. So the first thing that you want to do is plan ahead, if at all possible. If you're taking a long trip, you want to make sure you book your flights well in advance, book your hotels well in advance. It eliminates surprises on the other end, and travel is stressful enough. Even if it's fun, it's stressful enough that you don't want to have surprises on the other end. So look for your accommodations, read reviews. I do that all the time on various websites before I book a hotel. Look at your plane flights and see maybe there's a way that you can shorten the flight by going out of a nearby city. For example, when we used to live in Atlanta, sometimes it was easier and cheaper to drive to Birmingham to pick up a flight, and it was only 2 hours away from Atlanta, and it just made a big difference, especially if you were traveling internationally. The next tip is to try and book nonstop flights if at all possible. It's just easier for seniors to go from city A to city B, and you don't want those connections. It's a hassle sometimes. We just flew out of Boston and went internationally. We came in at one gate, and because it was international, we had to go to another gate. So there was a scramble to get off the plane, and then we had to find the bus that took us to the other gate or other terminal, sit on the bus, wait for the bus to get there. It was such a hassle and so stressful. We were worried about missing our flight. So if you can do it, a direct flight is much easier. That said, like in our case, having to travel internationally, a direct flight isn't always possible. So in those circumstances, if you have a connection, it's best to allow a bare minimum of 2 hours in between your connecting flights. Better to allow 3. If your airplane is delayed when leaving, then you have more catch-up time. Again, you always have to be able to get off the plane, and typically that takes time by itself, and then you've got to get to another gate, and then there's always the bathroom stops and whatever. And if you're flying international, you're going to have to go through passport control. So you need to allow extra time. So I would tell you really try to allow at least 3 hours between your connecting flights. Also, it's very helpful to create a checklist before you leave to make sure you have your IDs, your travel documents, your medications, your accommodations, and you have confirmation numbers for them. All these things. I have a friend who twice has tried to go on an international trip and gotten all the way to the airport and realized she left her passport at home. If she had a checklist, she would have known she didn't have that with her. My husband is an auditor. He lives and dies by checklists. So I'm here to tell you that is one way to reduce your stress. Make a checklist. So in this next section, we're going to talk about packing. So the first thing is to pack as light as possible. I've recently started slowly buying merino wool tops and pants because they travel very well. They don't wrinkle. You can wear them numerous times without them smelling. So it makes my luggage much lighter, and I don't have to worry about packing as much. So especially in these days with international travel, they're making your suitcases smaller and smaller, and they want them to weigh less. So having something like that, if at all possible, that you can wear several times and kind of mix and match to create different outfits, it's best to do just maybe pack 5 tops and 2 pairs of pants and your underwear and socks, and then throw in a couple of sweaters or something, depending on what your weather's going to be. And then you can mix and match all of those, assuming that they're all in the same color palette. You can mix and match them, create numerous outfits, and pack much lighter. It's also a good idea as far as medications go. First of all, you want to bring your medications in your personal carry-on. So if you're checking a bag, do not ever put your medications in there, because if you go to Detroit and your bag goes to LA, you're out of luck and don't have the meds. So make sure you put your medications in your travel-on backpack or whatever, your carry-on backpack. And then you also want to make sure that they are in the original bottles, particularly if you're going overseas. And it's a good idea to have a list of all your medications, your dosages, and who the doctor is that prescribed them, etc. You won't always get stopped if they search your medications or look through them, but in some countries, you've got to have that prescription so that they don't think you're trying to smuggle something in. So also in your personal carry-on, don't forget to bring things like a pillow, a sweater in case the plane is cold, um, books to read. Sometimes it's helpful to have just one of those little tiny lights, like a little pen light, in case you need to look in the dark if you're flying overnight, to look in your bags. And that's also helpful if you're going on a driving trip, but you're in a hotel or whatever. You may need a flashlight for something, so it's good to pack a little tiny flashlight. Also, a reusable water bottle. I don't buy water in the airport if I'm flying. I bring an empty water bottle, then I go and fill it up at the water fountains that they have, and that way it saves me a little bit of money, and I have enough with me on the plane. Also bring some snacks in case your flight is delayed if you're traveling by plane. And it's a good idea to bring a change of clothes in your personal carry-on item as well, because if your luggage goes astray, at least you will have another change of clothes. If you're traveling by car, a lot of the same thing applies. You want snacks in the car, you want water that you can drink, maybe even a change of clothes. The next section we're going to talk about is trip insurance. I highly, highly recommend trip insurance, and it's something that a lot of seniors overlook. I wouldn't do it, obviously, if this is a car trip, but if it's a plane flight or an organized tour somewhere or a river cruise, you definitely want trip insurance. I would tell you to be sure that you get trip insurance that has medical evacuation and a pre-existing conditions clause. Sometimes it's helpful too to get a cancel for any reason policy, just so that if you did have something come up and you suddenly can't go on the trip, you should hopefully be able to get at least some of your money back. But I'm particularly strongly wording get the medical evacuation part of the trip insurance. My uncle and his wife went on a tour one time and to the Amazon rainforest, and they were traveling with a group. They were walking in the rainforest, and one of the ladies in the group slipped and fell and broke her hip. They had to carry her out of the rainforest in a hammock, slung over two people's backs as they came out. You can imagine how excruciating that was. But then they took her to the hospital, which was great, and here she is with a broken hip. Then they needed to fly her home. Well, she had medical evacuation insurance, so they flew her home first class along with a nurse to help take care of her during the flight. It was all covered by the insurance. Conversely, another uncle went on a trip. He was on a cruise and they were in Panama, and he started having chest pains, so they put him in the hospital. Came to find out that he needed to have a bypass done, and he wanted to have that done back home. So he needed to be extracted or needed to leave the country of Panama. And they wanted to do that by an air ambulance rather than just trusting to put him on a flight and hoping he survived, to make it home. So an air ambulance is thousands and thousands of dollars. He did not have medical evacuation, so it ended up that his brother-in-law had to pay to get him home on the air ambulance, and now they're having to pay him back. So again, highly recommend medical evacuation coverage. The next section we're going to cover is health and mobility concerns. So if you're someone who uses a cane, a walker, a wheelchair, you can get assistance at an airport. They'll put you on the cart and take you, from wherever, security line to your gate or from one gate to another, but that has to be arranged in advance. So please be sure if you are buying a flight somewhere that you arrange to have that transportation in advance as well. And then while you're traveling, whether it's a car trip or whether it's a plane flight, make sure that you stay active. Walking will help keep your circulation going. If you're in a car on a car trip, try and stop every hour and a half or so. Try to shorten the time behind the wheel. So normally if you would travel for 8 hours in a day, maybe consider making it 6 hours and taking longer breaks so that you're not having to be behind the wheel so long. When I travel, especially on a long international flight, I make sure that I'm pumping my feet and I'm turning my feet and stomping my feet and doing all kinds of things like that periodically throughout the flight. And I also try and get up and walk a little bit, even if it's just back and forth to the bathroom. It just helps to keep the blood flowing and helps to avoid deep vein thrombosis. And I also forgot to mention, wear compression stockings, whether you're in a long car trip or you're in a long flight. Compression stockings will also help you to avoid deep vein thrombosis. Next, we're going to talk about transportation. So depending on where you go, sometimes it can be cheaper actually to just go, fly from one place to another and then have a taxi or Uber pick you up and take you around if you're not going to be going around too many places. So look into those before you rent a car just to see whether or not you would save some money by having transportation like that. And also, it makes sense, but I hadn't really thought about it. Uber and Lyft can be found overseas in most cities. So also check those prices before you go too, because if you are traveling overseas, it may be that it would be cheaper for you to be picked up by an Uber or Lyft rather than a taxi. Just depends on your destination, but it's good to look into those things before you go. Next, we're going to talk about accommodations. So the first thing that I would tell you to do is be sure that when you are looking at a hotel to book for your vacation or your trip, that you check reviews to find out if it's senior friendly. You don't want to show up at a hotel and you've got, 4 bags with you and they have no bellhop and no elevator, and now you're on the 4th floor and you have to lug those bags up and down the stairs. It's not maybe as common in the United States, but in a lot of places in other countries, this is very common. In Peru, we stayed in hotels that didn't have any elevators. You had to climb the stairs. We had the same thing in some of the hotels that we stayed in the London area. You just never know, so double check that. And speaking of that as well, when we were in London last summer, it was very hot. And so a lot of the older hotels in London are like converted townhouses and things like that. They don't maybe have air conditioning because they don't need it for very long during the summer. But it can be very hot and very uncomfortable when you're sleeping. So again, that's something that I would tell you to check as well. Whatever accommodations you're looking at, be sure that they have air conditioning and heat. We were in Cusco, Peru, and while they had a floor heater in the winter, we were there in the winter, while they had a floor heater in our room, they also had very, very thick woolen blankets because the floor heater didn't warm the space up very well. So just something to think about checking into. So you want to be sure that they have elevators, maybe walk-in showers would be good for your situation, air conditioning, heating, things like that. Again, check reviews. The next section is about staying safe and staying informed. So it's a good thing to bring your cell phone with you. You'll be connected with friends and family. If you're traveling overseas, you can buy a SIM card that you can trade out your SIM card and use the European or South American, wherever you are. You can use that SIM card to help you save on your international phone costs. It's also a good idea to research where you're going, particularly if it's international, to see what local customs are, to see what local laws are, because you don't want to step on anybody's toes when you're traveling. When we were in Istanbul, for example, we had a tour of a mosque. Well, they would like your head covered and your knees covered, your shoulders covered. So we needed to know that we had to dress that way. So again, it's just helpful, and you don't look like a horrible tourist that doesn't care if you know what you're talking about as far as their local customs go. And speaking of overseas travel, if you're going somewhere that you don't speak the language, one thing that's particularly helpful is to download a translation app before you go. We use Google Translate. It was fun because when we were in Lima, Peru, we don't speak Spanish. And so our cab driver who picked us up from the airport did not speak any English. He pulled out Google Translate. He would speak into it, hold it up for us in the back, and it would tell us what he was saying. And we had a great conversation with him during the 45-minute drive from the hotel or airport to the hotel. So it's just very helpful, at least that way, if you're in a restaurant or you're wandering around in a city somewhere and you need directions, whatever, you can communicate. Don't forget to share your itinerary with family or friends so that people know where you are and when you're expected home in case there's an emergency of some type. And also bring a portable phone charger with you. The last thing you want is to be wandering around in a city that you're unfamiliar with and suddenly you don't know where you are and you have no way of getting directions. So that's it for my video. So as you can see, travel planning is very helpful to keep your next trip relatively stress-free. Whether you're exploring locally or internationally, the world is full of adventure and opportunities for exploring, so enjoy it. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscription button down in the corner and the notification bell so that you don't miss any of our informative videos. Thanks for watching again, and until the next video, take care, happy travels, bye.